My parents made me buy them a house, but secretly gave it to my spoiled brother. Most families like to brag about how much they sacrificed for their kids, but in my family, it always sounded less like love and more like an invoice. Like there was a running tab with my name on it that nobody ever really let me forget. I grew up hearing how lucky I was, how other kids would kill for the chances I got, how my parents were breaking their backs so I could have a better life. And on paper, that sounds sweet, I know. But when you are the one living inside it and every favor comes with a string attached, it stops feeling like love and starts feeling like a lifetime subscription to guilt. My name is Kira, by the way, and if you were sitting on my couch right now with a cup of instant coffee in your hands, this is exactly how I would tell you everything. Probably waving my arms a lot and apologizing for going on a rant, because that is what happens every time I try to explain my family to someone who did not grow up trapped in the same weird little system. I have one younger brother, the golden child, the miracle baby, the center of the universe. Pick whatever phrase you want and it probably fits. When we were kids, I was the serious one, the one doing extra credit and color coding her notebooks, while he was allowed to try martial arts for 3 weeks, then guitar lessons, then theater, then drop all of it because he did not feel passionate. My parents had this whole story about how he needed freedom to find himself, and how I, as the older one, needed to understand and be the example, which in practice meant I picked up chores, watched him, and kept my grades perfect, while he floated in and out of hobbies like a tourist. They poured every dime they had, plus a whole lot of money they did not have, into my education, but not in a sweet, we believe in you way, more in a, this is our retirement plan walking around on 2 legs way. And yes, I did feel that pressure every single day, even if nobody said the quiet part out loud. When I finished high school, there was never a question about whether I would go to college or take a gap year or figure out what I wanted, because that would have required me to be a person and not a project. My parents sat me down at the tiny kitchen table, slid a stack of printed financial aid offers in front of me like we were doing a business deal, and told me everything was already decided. They had taken out loans, cashed out a small retirement account they had, borrowed from an aunt, and basically committed financial arson on their own lives to pay for my degree in tech. They kept repeating that word, sacrifice, like it was a prayer. When I nervously said I could take the loans in my name because I was 18 and terrified of wrecking them financially, my dad shook his head and told me I did not understand interest rates, that I would be buried in debt forever, that this way was better. And my mom patted my hand like I was a child asking for a pony. At the time, it felt like they were protecting me. Looking back, it is very clear they were tying a nice tight rope of obligation around my neck and calling it love. College was not some glamorous montage. I worked part-time in the campus library, shared a room the size of a small closet with another girl, and spent most nights alternating between crying over code and calculating how much food I could buy with what was left in my account. My parents called constantly, not to ask how I was doing, but to remind me how much everything cost. Every good grade was worth it. Every bad grade was followed by pointed little comments about wasted money. My brother, meanwhile, stayed home, drifted through community classes for a semester, dropped out, and then decided he needed time to figure things out. Nobody waved invoices in his face. Nobody told him he was the family's big investment. He got sympathy. I got spreadsheets. When I finally graduated and landed my first real job in tech support for a software company in a mid-sized city, my parents acted like they had won the lottery. I was 24, living with 2 roommates, commuting 40 minutes in an old car that rattled every time I went over a bump, and making decent money for someone just starting out. It felt like breathing real air for the first time. I paid my own rent, my own groceries, my own health insurance, and it was exhausting and terrifying and weirdly thrilling. My parents, of course, saw numbers on a paycheck and instantly started doing calculations I was not invited into. The first time they brought up the house, it was during one of those family dinners that are not really dinners, just a bunch of takeout containers on the table and my mother talking nonstop about bills. My dad cleared his throat the way he always did before a big announcement and said it was time to talk about the future. He laid out this whole speech about how rent was throwing money away, how owning a house was the only smart move, how interest rates were not going to stay low forever. And I nodded along, thinking he was talking about me buying a small place for myself near my job. Then he dropped it like it was nothing. He and my mother had found a house in a quiet neighborhood near their church, and he thought it made perfect sense for me to buy it for them. I laughed at first because I honestly thought he was joking. I was still sharing an apartment, hanging on to my job like a lifeline, trying to save a little each month in case my car finally did die, And he was talking about me buying a whole house for two people who were both still working. My mother gave me this hurt look, the kind where she pulls her lips in and her eyes get shiny, and told me they had done so much for me. They had sacrificed everything, and all they wanted was to live out their later years without throwing money away on rent. When I said I did not think I could afford that, my dad's voice got cold in that way that still makes my stomach tighten, and he asked if I was really telling him no after everything they had done. For a while, I dodged the conversation. I got busy at work, picked up on call shifts, claimed I was too focused on stabilizing my own life to take on anything else, which was true, but did not land well. The calls from my parents started getting shorter and sharper. Little comments slipped in about how my brother would never abandon them, how some kids understood loyalty, how they would never have taken those loans if they had known I would turn my back on them. It was like being slowly marinated in guilt. I stopped visiting as often because every trip home turned into some version of that same conversation. And every time I drove back to my apartment, I cried the whole way, feeling like the worst daughter on the planet, even though logically I knew it was insane to expect a 20-something to buy her parents a house. The thing about being raised to be the responsible one is that eventually the guilt wears you down. Over the next few years, my career moved forward. I got a promotion into a better paid role, still in tech, but more project-based, which meant more hours and more stress, but also more money. My roommates moved out. I found a smaller place closer to work, and slowly, very slowly, my savings account stopped looking so pathetic. Meanwhile, my parents kept looping back to the house topic like it was a show they refused to cancel. Every phone call, every visit, every holiday had some version of "when you buy the house" sprinkled in. My brother would just sit there scrolling on his phone, occasionally chiming in to say how nice it would be for them to have a yard or a garage, like that decision had nothing to do with him. When I was 28, tired, burned out, and honestly just sick of the constant tension, I did the stupid, predictable, responsible thing. I gave in. My parents found a modest, single-family place in a quiet suburb, nothing fancy, but nicer than anywhere we had ever lived when I was a kid. The bank would not approve them a loan because of their credit and debts. But the loan officer smiled at me like I was some kind of hero when we sat down at the desk together. Because my income and credit looked solid, we could get approved with my dad as the primary borrower and me as the co-borrower. The deed, the paperwork, all of it went under his name. He promised right there in the office that once everything settled and some tax situation got sorted, they would put my name on the title too. I remember nodding, thinking I should insist on it being in my name from the start. And then hearing my mother sniff beside me and saying she felt like such a burden. And just like that, I pushed the thought down. For the next 5 years, my life basically revolved around paying for a house I did not live in. Every month, I transferred the mortgage payment to my dad's account before the due date, because the loan was in his name, and the automatic debit came from him. I never saw the actual bank statement since my dad was the primary borrower and handled all communication with the bank. I just transferred the money he told me was due each month, trusted him completely, and assumed everything was being paid correctly. On top of that, because I was still stuck in that grind mindset, I sent extra whenever I could. 50 here, a few hundred there, sometimes whole chunks of my bonus, always with the idea that we were killing the principal faster. My dad praised me constantly for being so responsible, and my mother bragged to anyone who would listen about how our daughter bought us a home. I tried to feel proud. I really did. I told myself it was fine that I was still renting a one-bedroom near work while my parents had a yard and a guest room. I told myself I would get my turn later, once the debt was lower, once everything was more stable. I did not visit that often because it hurt, if I am honest. Every time I drove up to that house, the one with the little porch swing and the flowers my mother planted, I felt this weird disconnect. It was technically their place, but also paid by me, but also not mine. We did holidays there, birthdays, the standard stuff. My brother would come over with his girlfriend, lounge on the couch like he owned the place, make jokes about how cozy it was. My parents would beam at him, ask if he needed more food, tell me how lucky I was to have such a caring brother who always checked on them, as if he was the one sending mortgage money every month instead of just showing up for free meals. The real fun started 5 years after the purchase. I had just crushed a brutal deadline at work and decided, on a random Saturday, that I would surprise my parents with a visit. I had not been out there in months, and I figured I would show up with pastries, maybe help with some yard work, try to reconnect without the whole house conversation hanging over us. I remember pulling up to the curb and noticing a car I did not recognize parked in the driveway, thinking maybe my parents had company. The curtains looked different too, which should probably have been my first clue that something was off. But my brain did that thing where it explained it away immediately. Maybe my mother redecorated. Maybe my brother was just there for the weekend. I rang the bell, juggling a box of pastries in one hand, already rehearsing some light-hearted line in my head, and it was my brother who opened the door, barefoot in old sweatpants and a shirt that definitely looked like it had seen the inside of a laundry basket, but not the outside. Behind him, I could see toys scattered on the floor, a baby gate propped against the wall, a kind of comfortable mess that you only get when you live somewhere, not when you're just visiting. I blinked, thrown off. He looked just as surprised to see me, but only for a second, then he grinned like this was the most normal thing in the world and stepped aside, telling me to come in. I walked into the living room and immediately knew this was not my parents' house anymore. I mean, technically it was the same structure, but the framed pictures on the wall were all of my brother, his pregnant wife, then their newborn, then the baby a little older. My parents' old pictures were gone. The couch was different, the arrangement of furniture was different, even the smell was different. More like baby wipes and coffee than my mother's cooking. My heart started hammering in my chest. I asked, in that overly light tone you use when you already suspect you are not going to like the answer, where our parents were. My brother scratched the back of his neck and said, like he was telling me the weather, that our parents had moved out a while ago. They had found a smaller place closer to some friends, he said, and it just made sense for him and his wife and their baby to move in here. My brain short-circuited for a second, like his words were in a language I did not speak. I asked, slowly, what he meant by move in here, because I was still clinging to the idea that this was my parents' house that they were letting him stay in. And he shrugged and said, no, they had signed the place over to him. It was his now. It was a gift. I felt my knees go weak. I actually had to put the pastry box down on the coffee table because my hands were shaking. I asked how that was even possible, because the last time I checked, the mortgage was still being paid every month with my money. He nodded, like he totally understood why I was confused, and said, yeah, the loan was still technically in our dad's name, but the title had been transferred to him and his wife since they were the ones living there and starting a family. He said it like this was a kind of sweet, logical arrangement. He added that our parents knew I would not mind, because I had a good job and no kids, so I did not need a house as much as he did. I wish I could tell you I handled that moment with grace or calm, but I did not. I asked him if our parents had told him who was paying the mortgage. He shrugged again and said, of course they had. But they had also explained how much they had spent on my education, how lopsided things had been, how this was just balancing the scales. My ears were ringing. Somewhere, his baby started crying in another room, and his wife called from the hallway asking who was at the door. And I just stood there in the middle of the living room I had paid for, surrounded by their pictures, realizing I had literally bought my brother a house without even being told. I left without touching the pastries. I do not even remember getting back into my car, just that I was suddenly on the freeway with the box still on the passenger seat, driving toward the address my brother had given me when I demanded to know where our parents were now. They had moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. Nothing fancy, a cheap complex with thin walls and a tiny balcony. My mother answered the door with her hair pulled back and surprise all over her face, which quickly shifted into annoyance when she realized what I must have already found out. I did not bother with small talk. I walked straight into the living room, set the pastries down on the table, and asked why the house was in my brother's name. My dad came out of the bedroom, already defensive, saying I needed to calm down, that this was not the way to talk to them. I told him I had just walked into the house I was paying for and found my brother treating it like his kingdom. So no, I was not calm. My mother launched into her speech. The one I should have known was coming. She said my brother had been through so much, that he had never gotten the same opportunities I did, that he had scraped by on odd jobs while I was off living my dream, that when his wife got pregnant, they realized he needed a stable home more than anyone. I reminded them that I had been the one sending the mortgage money every single month. My dad waved that off, saying the loan was in his name, and he was the one dealing with the bank, and I was just helping, like a good daughter should. My mother said they had assumed I would not mind if they signed the place over to my brother because I did not even live there, and I had such a bright future. She said something like, we invested everything in you, now it is your turn to invest in family. And I swear I saw red. I told them they had taken my money and used it to buy their favorite child a house, then moved into a cheap apartment and acted like they had made some noble sacrifice. We went in circles. They kept trying to reframe it as fairness, as justice, as some big balancing act, and I kept coming back to the simple math of it. I had been busting my ass to make those payments, and nobody had thought I deserved a say in what happened to the property. My dad finally snapped and said I sounded ungrateful, that any other kid would be honored to help their brother the way I had, that if they had known I would turn into such a selfish person, they would never have paid for my education. That line, the one I had heard in different flavors my entire life, landed like a punch. I felt this cold, flat feeling settle over me. I picked up my bag, told them I was done funding their little experiments in fairness, and walked out. I checked into a cheap hotel that night because I literally could not bring myself to drive back home yet. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the ugly floral bedspread, doing math in my head. How much had I sent them over the years? How much had I cut from my own life to make sure that mortgage was always on time? I pulled up my banking app and scrolled through transfer after transfer after transfer. All those house payment labels I had jokingly typed in the memo line each month, and I felt sick. Somewhere between crying and wanting to throw my phone against the wall, a tiny, practical part of me spoke up and said, "You need to see the actual loan." The next morning, I walked into the bank branch that held the mortgage. The loan officer recognized me vaguely from the original signing, or maybe he just pretended to, I do not know. I told him I was a co-borrower and I wanted to see the payment history. He pulled it up on his screen, then printed it out for me, pages and pages of dates and amounts and interest and principal. I spread them on the desk and compared them to a list of the transfers I had made to my dad. It did not take long to see it. The numbers did not match. Month after month, the amount actually sent to the bank was less than what I had sent my dad. I pointed it out, my voice doing that too calm thing that usually means I'm about to lose it. The loan officer frowned, double-checked, agreed that yes, the payments had been the minimum due plus a little, but nowhere near the aggressive extra payments I had been pushing for. In some months, the difference between what I had sent and what the bank had gotten was hundreds. In 1 month, it was more than 1,000. I called my dad right there, hands shaking, and told him to get to the branch. He arrived looking annoyed, like I had dragged him out of something important, and I swear if the manager had not been sitting right there, I might have thrown those papers in his face. He tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding at first, said he must have mixed up accounts, that maybe he had paid some bills with the extra money by mistake. When I would not let it go, he got angry. He reminded me loudly enough that people in nearby cubicles turned their heads, that I sent him that money voluntarily. He said he never promised every cent would go to the mortgage. He said he had used some of it for their rent, for groceries, for my brother's baby shower, for things, for the family. He made it sound like I had some nerve questioning how he used his money once it hit his account. I do not remember every word of what I said next, but I know my voice got sharp, and I know I mentioned fraud, and I know the loan officer's eyes got wide. My dad called me dramatic, said I was trying to ruin him, said I had no idea how hard his life had been. It was like the script they had always used on me, turned up to maximum volume in a public place. Finally, the manager gently stepped in, said this sounded like a family matter, and asked if we wanted to continue the discussion in a private office. I declined. I took the printouts, put them in my bag, stood up, and told my dad very clearly that I was done sending money. He followed me out to the parking lot, calling my name, telling me to stop acting like a stranger, reminding me that without him and my mother, I would have nothing. I turned around and told him that thanks to them, I had a degree. Sure, but everything after that had been me, my work, my late nights, my panic attacks, my savings. I told him the ledger he was always waving in my face with their sacrifices had now been balanced, and then some. I got in my car and drove away while he was still talking. I never saw that stolen money again, and honestly, that fact alone told me everything I needed to know about who they really were. On the drive back to my city, I thought about every time I had skipped going out with coworkers because I needed to be smart with money, every time I had postponed replacing my noisy car or buying decent furniture because of the house payment. I thought about my brother lounging barefoot in that living room, complaining about how expensive diapers were, while I quietly wired hundreds to a mortgage that now belonged to him. There was this weird sense of clarity that settled over me. Nothing had changed in terms of the numbers or the reality, but my brain had finally caught up. I realized they were never going to see me as anything other than a walking wallet, and that meant I had a choice. Keep playing the role they wrote for me, or walk off the stage. The first month I did not send the mortgage money. My phone lit up like a slot machine. Calls, messages, voicemails, all of them from numbers I recognized and numbers I did not. I blocked my parents' numbers after the third day of being called at work and late at night. Then they started using other phones. I finally changed my number completely, sent the new one only to friends I trusted, and sat in my small, slightly shabby apartment listening to the quiet. It felt wrong at first. like I had forgotten something crucial, like I had skipped a step in my personality. There was always this moment in the month when I would sit down, pay my bills, and send money for the house. That month, I paid my own bills, put some extra into savings, and then nothing. No transfer. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long time. Eventually, I closed the laptop and made myself a cheap dinner and tried not to freak out. It took maybe 2 weeks before my dad showed up at my door. I opened it just enough to stand there, blocking the entry. He looked tired, genuinely tired, and for a second, I almost let the old script run. He started talking before I could, saying the bank had called, the payment had not gone through, they were going to get late fees, that I could not just stop, that I was being selfish. I took a breath and told him I knew exactly what I was doing. I told him calmly that I had checked the loan balance, that I had seen the payment history, that I had done the math, and that as far as I was concerned, I had already repaid whatever debt they thought I owed for college and then some. He tried to guilt me, of course. He asked if I wanted my brother's baby to be homeless, if I wanted my parents to be on the street, if I thought that would make me happy. I reminded him that my brother was a grown man who had accepted a house as a gift without ever asking who was paying for it. I reminded him that my parents had signed that house over without telling me. I said, if they were going to talk about responsibility, they should maybe start there. He raised his voice, told me I was twisting things, told me I sounded like some stranger he did not recognize. I said that maybe the stranger was just the version of me that was done being used. Eventually, I told him he had to leave. He stood in the hallway outside my apartment, still talking, still throwing phrases like ungrateful and heartless and after everything we did, and I closed the door. I slid down the back of it, sat on the floor shaking, and cried until my head hurt. Even knowing I was right, even knowing this was the only way to break the cycle, it felt like ripping my own skin off. That is the thing nobody tells you about setting boundaries. From the inside, it does not feel brave or empowering. It feels like you are abandoning people, even when they have been draining you for years. From there, things spiraled on their side. I only know pieces because I really did go no contact. Through a cousin who still follows my mother on a social media app, I heard that the mortgage fell behind quickly. My parents had their own rent now, plus the loan, plus regular bills, and without my monthly deposit, the numbers just did not work. They asked my brother and his wife to start contributing, at least half, maybe more. He apparently refused, saying the house had been a gift and that gifts do not come with invoices. My mom complained to the cousin that they had raised him wrong, which honestly made me laugh in a very bitter way when I heard it. They tried for a while to juggle everything, from what I hear. My dad picked up extra shifts. My mother cut back on anything that looked like a luxury, and they dipped into what little retirement savings they had left. The tension between them and my brother got worse with every month. There were screaming matches about money, about who owed what, about promises made and broken. The cousin told me there was one particularly bad fight where my brother shouted that they should have just asked me to buy the house in my name from the start if they were going to treat it like my responsibility, and that my mother burst into tears and said they had tried, but I had turned cold. Eventually, the bank did what banks do. Late fees stacked up, warnings were sent, and my parents realized they were going to lose the house anyway if they did not do something. They listed the place and sold it quickly, under market value, just to get out from under the loan before it turned into a full-blown foreclosure. Because my brother's name was on the deed, they couldn't sell it without him. From what I heard, he fought it until the bank started sending final notices. In the end, he signed, furious, because he couldn't afford to catch it up and he didn't want to be the one standing there when the locks changed. After the mortgage was paid off and the fees were covered, there was a little money left, but nowhere near what they had hoped. My brother and his wife were furious. They moved out and in with her parents, telling anyone who would listen that my parents had stolen their future. My parents moved into an even smaller apartment, the kind with peeling paint and unreliable heat, and started telling the extended family that they were fiercely independent now, that they did not need anyone, that they had cut ties with their ungrateful daughter. I checked my credit report obsessively for months after that, terrified the late payments would destroy the score I had worked so hard to build, but somehow it survived. Of course, that independent speech did not stop them from trying to reach me. Even without my number, they found ways. Emails from addresses I did not recognize, messages sent through coworkers they had met once, a handwritten letter left at the receptionist desk at my job. All of them had the same core message, that I had destroyed the family by walking away, that I had forced them into hardship, that my brother was struggling, that they were old and tired. They always slid past the part where they signed a house over without talking to the person paying for it. They never mentioned the missing money. In their version of the story, I had simply snapped and abandoned them. I kept all the messages in a folder on my computer for a while, not because I planned to respond, but because part of me needed proof that I was not imagining it, that I was not being cruel. I would read them when I felt guilty, remind myself how every sentence twisted facts, how every apology was buried under blame. Slowly, the waves of guilt got smaller. I started to imagine a future that did not involve my bank account being permanently attached to my parents' decisions. Months passed. Then, one afternoon, on a day already bad enough that I remember it clearly, my dad showed up in my city again. This time, he did not come to my apartment. He waited outside my office building, caught me on my lunch break like some kind of ambush. I saw him before he saw me, standing near the entrance in his old jacket, looking older than I remembered, and a big part of me wanted to turn around and pretend I had not seen him. I did not, because apparently there are still parts of me that cannot fully commit to being ruthless. I walked up, took a breath, and asked what he was doing there. He did not even bother with small talk. He went straight to the ask. He said they were tired of renting. He said moving around at their age was hard. He said they deserved stability. He said, and I remember this word for word, that since they had given my brother a house, it was only fair that I now buy a house for them. As if that line made any sense. He talked about how I was doing so well, how I was always good with money, how it would not even be that hard for me. He said they had been looking at listings, that there were plenty of places in neighborhoods not far from me, and how nice it would be to live close again. I laughed. I could not help it. It just came out, this sharp sound that did not have much humor in it. I asked him if he was seriously standing in front of me, asking me to buy another house, after what had happened with the first one. He frowned like I was being unreasonable. He said that was different, that back then they were just trying to set my brother up, that now they were thinking about themselves. He said my refusal to keep paying had forced them to sell at a loss, and that if I had just continued helping a little longer, none of this would have been necessary. In his head, it all lined up neatly. I was the cause, therefore I was the solution. I told him no. Not a soft no, not a maybe when things are more stable, just a clean, blunt, I am not buying you a house. I told him my money was going toward my own future now. I told him I had plans for a place of my own. I told him that whatever fantasies he had about me being their retirement plan were just that. Fantasies. He tried to guilt me again. He said my brother had abandoned them, that they had no one else, that if anything happened to them, it would be on my conscience. I said very quietly that my conscience was already overloaded from years of carrying responsibilities that were never mine, and that I was done. He left angry, of course. He muttered something about me regretting this, about how when they were gone I would cry at their grave and wish I had done more. Maybe he is right. Grief is weird. But I also know that if I had said yes that day, I would have been signing up for another lifetime of being their safety net, and I have run that program enough times to know how it ends. So he walked away down the sidewalk, shoulders hunched, and I stood there for a minute watching him go, then went back upstairs and answered emails like my whole emotional world had not just been yanked around again. After that, I doubled down on my own plans. I cleaned up my budget, cut a few unnecessary subscriptions, cooked at home more, put every spare dollar into savings. I stopped apologizing every time I turned down an invite that involved expensive trips or nights out. Instead of paying for a house I did not live in, I watched the number in my account creep higher. It was slow and boring and deeply satisfying. Work stayed intense, but in a way that felt different now that I was doing it for me instead of some moving target of parental approval. I did not tell anyone in my family what I was doing, obviously. I barely told my friends. I had learned the hard way that other people's opinions could complicate the simplest decisions. When I finally felt ready to start looking at houses, I did it quietly. I met with a real estate agent recommended by a co-worker, someone who knew the local market and, more importantly, did not know my family. We went to open houses on weekends, walked through beige carpeted bedrooms and dated kitchens, and occasionally a place that actually felt like it could be mine. I kept my expectations realistic. I was not looking for something huge or fancy, just a small place where I did not share walls with loud neighbors, and where the decision to paint or hang a shelf belonged to me. The day I found my house, it honestly did not feel like some big magical moment. It was a modest place on a quiet street, with a small yard out back and a front porch barely big enough for 2 chairs. The inside needed some cosmetic work, but nothing terrifying. What sold me was the way the light came into the living room, and the fact that the monthly payment, including taxes, was something I could handle without needing to sacrifice my entire quality of life. We ran the numbers, and for the first time, I was signing loan documents where my name was the one at the top and nobody else's was anywhere near them. Closing happened in a blur of signatures and initialed pages and those nervous jokes people make in conference rooms to keep from freaking out. When it was done, the agent handed me a small envelope with the keys, and I held them in my palm like they might evaporate. I drove straight to the house, walked in, and stood in the empty living room for a long time. It was quiet, kind of echoey, and it smelled faintly of fresh paint and cleaning products. There were no pictures on the walls yet, no furniture, no history. For the first time in my life, I was standing in a home that nobody could yank away from me because of some secret paperwork or emotional manipulation. It was mine. I did not post about it anywhere. I did not send a mass text. I told exactly 3 people: my closest friend from work, my neighbor from my old apartment who had seen me crying in my car enough times to earn the right to know why, and another friend who helped me move boxes on her one day off. We rented a small truck, hauled my mismatched furniture and sad little collection of kitchen stuff across town, and spent a whole weekend sweating and laughing and eating cheap pizza on the floor. Every time I carried a box up my new front steps, something in my chest loosened a little. For a few weeks, it felt like I was living in a bubble. I went to work, came home, assembled flat-pack furniture badly, painted one wall 3 times because I kept changing my mind, and learned the new sounds of my neighborhood. A dog barking 2 houses down, the humming of an air conditioning unit that clearly needed a service, kids riding bikes in the late afternoon. I had this ridiculous grin every time I took the trash out to the curb because it was my curb. It was peaceful in a way my life had not been peaceful in years. Of course, peace never lasts in my family's universe. The way the secret came out was so mundane it would almost be funny if the fallout had not been so dramatic. One afternoon, a delivery truck pulled up with a couch I had splurged on after realizing my old one looked tiny and sad in the new living room. The 2 delivery guys carried it in, maneuvering around the doorway, chatting about sports and traffic. At some point, one of them stepped back onto the porch with the door open and called out the address aloud to confirm they were at the right spot. A woman walking her dog on the sidewalk looked over, did a double take, and then waved at me through the open door. I recognized her vaguely. One of those faces you associate with childhood gatherings and church potlucks. She was a friend of a cousin or something like that, someone who had grown up in the same general circle as my family. She smiled, said she had heard I lived in the city now, asked if this was my place. I froze for half a second, and then, because I am not great at lying on the spot, I said yes. She gushed about how cute it was, asked how long it had been mine, and I mumbled something non-committal. We chatted for maybe 5 minutes, her dog impatiently tugging on the leash, and then she went on her way. I went back inside, stomach already twisting, because I knew how fast information moved through that particular grapevine. It took less than a week. One evening, my new doorbell rang with a kind of frantic insistence that did not match how my friends usually knocked. I was in sweatpants with paint in my hair, halfway through assembling a bookshelf, and there was a part of me that already knew who it would be before I even checked the small camera screen by the door. There they were, both of them. My mother clutching her purse like a shield, my dad with his mouth set in that tight line that meant he was on a mission. They had not been at this address before, but obviously they had written it down the second that woman mentioned it at whatever gathering she had gone home to. I stood there for a minute just watching them on the screen, my heart pounding, my mind flipping through options. If I opened the door, I knew exactly how this would go. Tears, shouting, guilt, maybe even a scene on the lawn. If I did not, they would probably escalate in other ways. In the end, I cracked the door open just enough to step onto the porch and pulled it closed behind me, leaving my house literally and figuratively at my back. My mother immediately tried to sweep past me into the house, almost on autopilot, and I put my hand on the door and told her to stop. They did not ease into it. My dad gestured around at the porch and said he could not believe I had bought a house and not told them. My mother said it was like a slap in the face, that after everything they had been through, their own daughter was hiding her life from them. I reminded them that the last time there had been a house involved, they had signed it over to my brother behind my back and siphoned off extra payments for years. My dad waved that away, said we were not talking about the past, we were talking about this, about me being selfish and secretive. He accused me of abandoning them to struggle in a tiny apartment while I built a comfortable life for myself. I felt my throat close up, but I also felt that cold clarity again. I told them very calmly that what I did with my money and my time now was none of their business. I said I had bought this house with my own loan, in my own name, with no co-borrowers, no quiet deals, no hidden strings. I told them I had not told them because I knew exactly how they would react, and standing on my porch watching them prove me right was weirdly satisfying in a twisted way. My mother started to cry. Actual tears this time, not just shiny eyes. She said she did not understand how I could be so cruel, how I could watch them live in such a cramped situation and not offer to help. Somewhere in the middle of that, my dad started pounding lightly on the door behind me, like he thought he could still get in if he just tried hard enough. I stepped in front of it completely and told him if he did not stop, I would call the police. He scoffed, said I was being dramatic, that I would never do that to my own family. I pulled out my phone, held it up, and told him I had already started recording the moment I saw them on the camera, and that if this harassment continued, I would absolutely file a report. For a second, something flickered across his face. Something like fear or calculation. He took a small step back. I did something then that felt both petty and necessary. I sent a short text to his phone, knowing he would get it as soon as he walked away and checked. In it, I wrote that any further attempts to contact me at my home, at work, or through third parties would be considered harassment, that I had documentation, and that I would be speaking to a lawyer about a formal order to keep them away if they did not stop. I hit send while my mother was still crying and my dad was still telling me I was overreacting. When his phone buzzed in his pocket, he pulled it out, read the message, and his eyes went hard. He said I was choosing strangers over my own parents. He said no piece of paper could erase the fact that I was their child. He said one day I would come crawling back when I needed them and they would not be there. I almost laughed again because the idea that I would ever ask them for anything at this point was so far from reality, it might as well have been science fiction. Instead, I just told them they needed to leave. I repeated it over and over like a broken record until finally my dad grabbed my mother's arm and steered her down the front steps. She kept looking back, waiting for me to run after them. I did not. The next week, I found a lawyer. Nothing fancy. Just a local attorney who handled a lot of family messes and neighbor disputes and the occasional simple restraining order. I brought a folder with printed emails, screenshots of their messages, and the video of them on my porch. I told him, feeling both ridiculous and desperate, that I wanted to make sure my parents could not just keep showing up wherever they felt like. He nodded like this was the most normal thing in the world, which weirdly helped. He explained my options in simple terms, nothing overly legal. He said we could start with a firm letter, something that laid out my boundaries and the consequences if they did not respect them, and then, if necessary, escalate. We drafted the letter together. It was short and to the point. It said I did not wish to have contact with them at this time. It said any attempts to come to my home, my workplace, or to contact me through third parties would be considered harassment. It said that if they continued, I would seek a formal protective order. It did not go into emotional history or debts or the house or any of that, because the legal system does not really care about who is the golden child and who is the walking bank. It cares about behavior. My lawyer mailed the letter with tracking. A few days later, the delivery confirmation came back. They had signed for it. After that, things got quiet in a way that felt almost unreal. No unexpected knocks at the door. No emails. No messages through friends. It was like someone had finally turned off a loud, annoying radio that had been running in the background of my life for years. I changed my phone number again, just to be safe, and gave it to even fewer people this time. I updated the security on my house, added a couple more cameras, set up alerts. I told my immediate neighbors that I had some family drama, and that if anyone showed up asking about me or trying to get in, they should call me before giving out information. Nobody looked at me like I was crazy, which told me they had probably seen worse. I wish I could say that after all of this, I felt nothing but relief, that I sat on my new couch in my new living room and basked in peace like some commercial for healthy boundaries. The truth is messier. There were nights when I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had gone too far. There were moments, especially around holidays, when I would be cooking something and a certain smell would punch me in the gut with memories of my mother making the same dish in some old apartment kitchen. I would think about my dad teaching me how to ride a bike in a parking lot, way back before everything turned into transactions and ledgers. Family is rarely all bad or all good, and that gray space makes it harder to walk away. But then I would remember my brother's face in that living room, casual and comfortable in a house he knew I was paying for. I would remember my parents signing that place over without even telling me, then acting like I was the selfish one when I did not want to keep funding their choices. I would remember my dad standing outside my office building asking me to buy them another house, like I was some kind of walking investment plan. I would remember my mother's voice on my porch, calling me cruel for not rescuing them from a situation they had created. And the anger, the hurt, the exhaustion would come back just enough to steady me. The last time my family tried to cross one of my lines, it was not my parents, it was my brother. Months after the letter, after the quiet had settled, my front door camera pinged one afternoon while I was on the couch reading. I glanced at the screen and saw him standing there, hands in his pockets, looking strangely small without our parents flanking him. His wife was in the car at the curb, staring at her phone. He rang the bell once, then again. I muted the chime and just watched. He shifted from foot to foot, looked around, then knocked, softer this time, like maybe I would be more likely to come to the door for a knock than a ring. I did not move. After a while, he pulled out his phone and, I am guessing, tried to call my old number. When that failed, he just stood there. Eventually, he spoke, not super loud, but loud enough that the camera picked it up. He said my name. He said he knew I was probably mad. He said things had gotten out of hand. He said our parents were struggling. He said he wanted to talk. There was a time when that would have been enough to get me to open the door, to offer to talk, to mediate, to fix. I sat there with my book face down on my lap, heart racing, every instinct trained from childhood screaming at me that I was being cruel by ignoring him. But I also knew that if I opened that door, it would not just be a conversation. It would be a wedge, a crack, the beginning of the same pattern all over again. There would be a story about how he had lost his housing, about how his kids needed stability, about how our parents were sick or broke or both. There would be an ask. There was always an ask. So I did nothing. I watched him wait for a while, then sigh, then walk back to the car. His wife said something I could not hear. He shrugged. They drove away. The notification cleared from my phone and the house was quiet again. I picked my book back up, but I did not read for a long time. I just sat there, listening to the sound of my own breathing and the faint hum of the air conditioner, feeling the weight of the choice I had made pressing on my chest, and at the same time, feeling something else under it, something like a very small, stubborn kind of peace. People like to throw around phrases like, blood is thicker than water, and family is everything, and maybe that works for them. For me, family had become a tangle of debts and obligations and guilt, and the only way out was to cut the threads one by one until I could finally step back and see myself as a person separate from all of that. My parents still exist somewhere, living whatever version of the story makes them feel like the heroes. My brother is still out there, probably telling anyone who will listen that I am cold, that success went to my head. Maybe one day we will cross paths again, in a way that does not end with someone standing on a porch demanding something. Until then, I come home from work, unlock my front door, and every single time I step into my own living room, I feel that tiny spark of satisfaction. This is my house. My name is on the loan. My money pays the bills. Nobody can sign it away behind my back. Nobody can show up and claim they deserve it more. It is not a mansion. The kitchen tiles are outdated, and the lawn always looks like it is one missed weekend away from going wild. But it is mine. That is the part my parents could never understand. They spent so long treating me like their retirement plan that they forgot I was also a person who might want something of her own. So if you are sitting here listening and thinking it sounds harsh, that cutting off your family over money is extreme, I get it. I used to think the same thing. But at some point you realize it is not just about money. It is about respect. It is about trust. It is about whether the people who claim to love you actually see you as a person or as a resource. My parents made their choice when they put my brother's comfort and their own narratives above my trust. I made mine when I finally stopped paying for a story I did not want to be in anymore. And now, every quiet evening in this little house is a reminder that sometimes walking away is not betrayal, it is survival.